Hi guys, hope wherever you are and whatever you're doing, you've had a sensational day. The idea of having your child ask where do babies come from is a daunting and uncomfortable subject for the majority of parents. It's something that many shy away from and avoid altogether. So we're here tonight to share 3 key tips how you can learn how to rock the talk without, feeling embarrassed and or awkward. Now, the question really is, would you rather that they find out this information from you? And if they don't hear it from you, who and where will they? If you avoid this conversation, you miss the opportunity to communicate your personal values and related topics like love and your view on healthy relationships. So as parents, we know we must be prepared with thoughtful and honest answers so our children continue opening up and talking to us, rather than looking for answers elsewhere, be it online or speaking to equally clueless kids in the playground or anywhere else. So, the birds and the bees conversation really is about giving them the tools to help them recognize the things that might otherwise just confuse them. And the sooner you get comfortable with the uncomfortable and discuss the topic, the more likely they will open up about other parts of their lives also. So if you're not ready to have this conversation, it's totally okay. And we'll be sharing some tips how you can sort of confront that situation when it arises, in the future. So presenting on the subject of reproduction will, of course, be an age-appropriate conversation. So depending on their age, of course, how you approach it and what you actually say to them. But in tonight's conversation, we are focusing on preschoolers and are joined by our special guest, Bree, owner and founder of B Minor Music. Now, Bree's over 14 years experience as an early childhood educator, is a mother of 3 kids. How you doing, Bree?
I'm so well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, really excited to be chatting with you as always. Now, you have 3 gorgeous kids who I absolutely love to bits. Now, I have to ask the question, have they ever prompted this question and asked you this before?
Yeah, so my eldest has asked from probably as young as 2 or 3. Was always interested in where babies came from, and we've always been really honest with her. So I basically started with telling her that the lady has an egg and the man has some sperm that are like little tadpoles, and the tadpoles go into the egg, and that's how a baby's been born. Now, that worked for years. And as she got older, she started asking a little bit more questions. And then when I was pregnant with my 3rd child, she was 6 years old, and we were walking up and down the aisles of the supermarket. And she said to me, "Now, Mum, I know how babies were born or how babies are made, but I don't understand how the actual sperm gets inside the egg." And that's where I had to actually have the sex talk with her, walking up and down the aisles of the supermarket. And I had to be very, very confident, but also very discreet, so that the people walking past us weren't like, "Who is this crazy lady talking about penises and vaginas in front of her 6-year-old daughter?"
Did you get any funny looks?
Well, no, nobody kind of worked out what we were doing. But again, I gave her enough information for her not to have questioned it since. So we were just discussing, she asked me what we were doing the interview on tonight, and I told her about how babies were made, and she didn't even bat an eyelid. So she's 9 now. So that talk was 3 years ago, and she's gained enough information from that conversation 3 years ago not to need to ask anymore.
And we were just saying, just leading up to this conversation, 10 minutes ago, we're saying that I guess for children, this question can pretty much be one of their quite a billion questions that they ask in their curiosity of the world, because they don't understand really what it is and all of that stuff. Of course. So once they obtain that information and it clarifies it in their mind, as you just said, so, your daughter then hasn't asked the question since, because that's like, okay, I've got that answer, tick, next question, whatever the question is, So from that perspective, it's interesting how we think about it and we view it as adults as to how they approach it as well. To them, maybe it's just another question to one of their million
totally
they ask.
Yep. Why are leaves green? Why is the sky blue? Yeah. Why do fish swim? Yeah.
Yeah. So, let's sort of get stuck into it. So we published an article titled, "When Your Child Asks How a Baby is Made." For someone who hasn't read the article, give us a quick overview of what it's about and what prompted you to write it.
Okay, so years ago when I was pregnant with my 2nd child, I was working in the kinder room. and the children were all fascinated by the baby in my belly and how it got there and everything like that. And as an educator, you've got to be really careful about the way you explain things to children, because as you mentioned, people have different beliefs, different ideals, and you don't want to offend any families and, you know, explain things that are going to upset people. So I turned it back on them and said, you know, what do you think? And one of the boys said the most beautiful thing, and it's the way I explained it to my daughter. He just said to me simply, boys have sperm that are like little tadpoles, and ladies have eggs, and when the sperm joins with the egg, the lady makes a baby. And I just went, who taught you that? And he said, my mum and dad. And I just went, well, they're spot on. Like, what wonderful people to say it so factual but so simple. So that, you know, he didn't need to know the nitty gritty. He just needed to know the basics. And I just was just like, that, it just made my day. It was just such a beautiful, and it also got me out of deep water, because then he had said to the children, you know, how I'd fallen pregnant, and I didn't have to say anything else about it. So, yeah. And for that moment onwards, I was like, that's how I'm going to explain it to my children.
Wow. So, and that's where you sort of, when you said it earlier, and I thought that's a beautiful way and an easy way of, a methodical way of explaining to kids how and why, you know, babies are made. It's part, I mean, and tonight's conversation really is part of a bigger picture, because it's not just about, I guess, the methodical part of it. It's also about understanding, I guess, the body safety and like we were saying before, teaching children about healthy relationships. And these conversations really are the key to raising safe, healthy, happy, and well-adjusted kids, really, overall. But, you know, we've got our three.
Exactly.
So let's get stuck straight into them. So question number one we've got for you: how do you explain to preschoolers how a baby's made?
Yep, so basically the way I just explained it to you then with the egg and the sperm is exactly the answer I would give. If they're asking more questions, then you answer those questions. So you've got to be as factual as you can, and just be honest. So if a child's not able to accept that information, they're not old enough or developmentally ready to accept the information, they just don't take it on. So it's like, I guess, you know, a child watching an episode of The Simpsons. Some, you know, things that adults will just be like, oh my goodness, that's taboo. The child just goes straight over their head. And it's the same thing with all of the facts that you'll be giving them. So, if you go, start simple. If they ask more questions, answer that. If they ask more questions, then answer that.
Yeah. And, you know, it's talking about the age appropriate part of the conversation as well. You know, what age do you think that it is appropriate to start opening up these conversations with children?
Well, I wouldn't bring it up with children. I would always wait for them to bring it up. So if they don't bring it up, it means they don't need to know. It means that they have no idea, and they have no, they're not ready to know, basically. So it's one of those things where you wait for them to approach you, and yeah, then you give them as much information as they need. If they don't think they've got enough information, they'll ask you more questions.
Of course, yeah. You know, and little ones really just getting to know their bodies, and as toddlers, I guess, they're becoming aware a little bit more and somewhat curious about the differences between girls and boys. That's really interesting, I guess, understanding that it is the right thing to do, to wait till children actually sort of do approach you. But once, I guess, if you haven't had that conversation, and once they're approaching, I guess, grade 3 to 4 and above, their bodies are starting to develop, and I guess, would you, as a question, do you think it's a good way to maybe open up that conversation, if you haven't had that and haven't asked it yet, to approach it as they're starting to sort of head into puberty, sort of at that age?
Yeah, like it would be very unusual for a child not to have had that conversation with you beforehand. I know there are a lot of people who just have just little books on, you know, there's the Where Do I Come From book and My Body books and things like that. And if you've got them slipped into your bookshelf from a very young age and they're always there, it's just one of those things where you kind of don't even need to discuss it, because all the information's there. They can look at it as they go on. Quite obviously, you know, with females, you do have to talk to them about their period and, you know, have those conversations about, you know, what they're going to use in the way of pads, tampons, cups, menstrual undies, those kind of things. And, you know, with boys with erections and things like that, you might need to talk to them and, you know, about that kind of stuff. But a lot of that will just come up, hopefully, naturally along the way, if you're always open with your children, and if you always do have those things in the background, and you know, those resources in your house, so that it's not a taboo thing. I think that's the most important thing with all of this. Is it's so important to be open, honest, and make it a positive thing.
Oh, and then that's our question number two. You know, why is it so important to be honest? So beautiful segue.
Well, because you just want it to be a positive thing. So basically, if you keep it a secret, then sex can be that thing where you might feel guilty about having sex. And, you know, when you're older, it's supposed to be a beautiful thing. So I think it's a very important thing when you are explaining, not when they're preschool, but when they're a little bit older and you talk to them, like when my daughter was 6, I did explain to her, you know, sex between two people is a beautiful thing. It's about, you know, enjoying each other's bodies. It feels good. And also the other thing that is really important is that having sex is not to make babies. So, because a lot of, you know, people don't just have sex to make babies. They have sex because it feels good. You can have a baby from having sex, but that's not the key reason why a lot of people have sex. And I think that's another important thing to discuss from quite early on.
Yeah. And, you know, on the subject, which is a very fine line here, you know, using proper terms, I guess, about this and about their bodies also is really important, I guess, to empower our children to talk freely about their bodies, the naming the body parts, also medical issues, and learning and reporting things, even, for example, like sexual abuse, without feeling like it's a taboo subject, I think, more than anything. And, you know, one of our partners, who he's got an incredible book, Only for Me. Same thing as a picture book, but it's really about understanding and respecting your body and understanding what a healthy relationship is and what a non-healthy relationship is. And I think it's really important on the subject.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, and understanding where that line is. But you're absolutely right. And that's what I said at the start too. If you don't have this conversation with your children, you don't have the opportunity to be able to explain to them your values and your viewpoint on all of these things, and also what is a healthy, loving relationship as opposed to what's that sort of stuff as well.
And I think that's a great point. Like, you need to also talk about consent, because especially given what's happening in the world at the moment, you know, people need to be empowered within themselves to be able to say yes or no, or, you know, I want to do this, I don't want to do this, and they need to be strong enough to be able to say this feels good or this doesn't feel okay, and you need to stop. And yeah,
100%.
Yeah, and I think, and that's another thing with the body part. So another reason that we need to use the correct terminology is because it's a known fact that pedophiles use pet names for genitalia. So, for example, if you're not calling, you know, it a vagina or a penis, and your child comes home and calls it a pet name, then you can kind of go, well, hold on a second, where did you learn that from? And it might lead to a discussion where you can stop something really quickly from, you know, happening, like if they're in the early stages of grooming or whatever. So it could, you know, potentially save a really bad situation from happening.
So you're saying that the right thing to do is to call it by its right technical name as opposed to giving it a nickname?
Yes, correct. Yep.
And the reason for doing that is because pedophiles are renowned for giving their children's genitalia a nickname per se.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So to clarify that. Yeah. Well, you know, it's let's just clarify the book that you spoke about before. What is it called? That you said that you have in the house.
Where do babies come from?
Yep. It's just a great book.
Yep. Yeah, so that's one that's been around for years. I know I grew up with a book that's called My Body, which I'm not sure that they publish anymore because it's so old, but I loved it. It was always on the bookshelf, and it has, it talks about your anatomy. It has pictures of, you know, men and women together. These days you'd probably have to extend that and have pictures of, you know, 2 males, 2 women, or, you know, all sorts of things, because, you know, things have changed, or they've always been that way, but we're open about it now. And, you know, and it was just, you know, one of the casual things. I love this particular book because there's one page that teaches you about farts and burps, and you know, and anatomically how, you know, farts and burps work, which I thought was hilarious. But yeah, so it's nice to just have those books in the shelf, just to make it a casual thing.
Picture books are sensational. So, you know, maybe see if we can find some links through to those books. If everybody else, Michelle Derrick is a partner of Kiddipedia, and her book is called Only for Me. Sensational book. She's just hit the 10,000 mark of selling them, and she sort of donates a large chunk to that to charity. But
sounds great.
Child like protection book, behaviour protection book, amazing. So I would definitely recommend picture books. Given that a lot of them are probably written in a gentle rhyming sort of sense as well, it's a very, very casual way to be able to open those conversations.
Yep.
Now, it's question number 3 now. Now, what do parents do if they're not ready to have that conversation, not ready to tell them where babies have come from? What's your...
Yeah. So basically, like if a child asks you, exactly what I did at the childcare centre with the children, just reflect it back onto them. So say to them, how do you think babies are made? And then they'll give you the answer. And you can either say, oh yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it, or you can correct them because by then you've had time to process what they've said. You can understand more where they're at and give them that information from there. Or I loved, there's an episode of Bluey, which is my children's most favourite cartoon now. If you haven't watched it, get onto it because they are the most beautiful, great role model of a family on the ABC. Bluey's dad was swinging one of the children around and the mum had been to a baby shower, and one of the questions was, Dad, where do babies come from? And he just swung the swing really fast around to avoid having that conversation. So as we say, when children have bad behaviour, to redirect them, you can redirect the question. But if you can talk about it, that's the ideal situation. But if you're really, really stuck, then you can redirect it.
Yeah, and like I was saying before, and I was just doing a bit of research for the chat tonight, I was reading this article, and this father was explaining how his son had asked him the question, and in his curiosity and in his innocence, he just wanted to know more and more, so he would give him a little bite of information. He's like, but what then? And the dad was just digging himself further and further because he probably wasn't giving it to the child, I guess, enough information, or wasn't clarifying it enough. And he's actually making it sort of more difficult and uncomfortable for himself in doing that. I guess, the goal and the aim of this conversation tonight is to try to do a better job that our parents actually did. And I guess these key steps, I guess, that's what they're here to do. So my viewpoint is, always undo to others as you would want done to you. So to be able to be empathetic for the child, but to be able to see it through their lens, so I guess to be able to keep it simple, give them the respect of giving them the right information, and to be honest, and sometimes maybe just not to offer more information than necessary, just give them the facts, because at the end of the day, that's just what they want. And or this may just be just one of their billions of questions that they have about life, and so if we sort of approach it from a methodical perspective and take some of these tips, I'm sure it can help lots of people.
And I think it's one of those things where each generation we just want to make it less taboo. So we don't want it to be a guilty thing. We want it to be this open, honest, it's a part of life. So we need to make it just a very casual nice bonding time to talk about things like that. 100%.
Well, I really enjoyed this chat tonight, although I was a little bit nervous sort of leading into it. I think we've got through it okay. So, woohoo! Do it. And if parents have got any other questions or they want to find you, Bree, whereabouts can they find you?
You can find me at bemindandmusic.com, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Give my love to the kids.
My pleasure. Always fun to talk to you.
And can't wait to chat soon. All right. See ya.
Cool. Bye.